Rudy, 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 Rudy. What is it, 50 years later, the man is still offsides? Jeez. You thought Will Anderson had a problem with offsides. Nah, Rudy invented being famously offsides. Shout out to Rudy. Shout out to Notre Dame. And shout out to Marshall, who took down the Fighting Irish this past weekend. If you just look at the score, the game was close. 26-20. The game was not that close. Sometimes you see one of these upsets and you're like, wow, Notre Dame blew it. They did this, they did that, whether it's turnovers or special teams blunders or whatever the case. That wasn't the case here. The better team won the game. In order for Notre Dame, look. Man, shout out to the red, white, and blue Marshall helmet. In order for Notre Dame to have beat Marshall this past weekend, Marshall would have had to shoot themselves in the foot. Marshall was the better team. Notre Dame's got issues, and guess where most issues start? Head coach. No, I am not going to declare Marcus Freeman a dead man walking in terms of his coaching tenure at Notre Dame. Now, I don't have any problem. I'm not shy. Or I don't have any beef or qualms even about coming out and saying that a coach is terrible and needs to be fired if I get to the point where I truly believe that. Like with like with this team's coach here, West Virginia, which we're talking about in a minute. Look, there's really no sugarcoating this situation for Notre Dame. It is bad. It is really bad. It's particularly bad when you consider the fact that Brian Kelly was winning 10, 11 games a year there. I know they didn't run him off. He quit on his own, went down to corn dog country down there at LSU. But the Notre Dame fans were ecstatic that he left. They were pumped up about Marcus Freeman, and they had reason. They had reason to be. Really. Marcus Freeman's a popular guy there at Notre Dame. The players really like him. Their recruiting class is looking good coming up for this coming year. But it has not been a good start for Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. There's just no other way to put it and no other way to say it. He's now 0-3 as head coach at Notre Dame. He was interim coach in the bowl game to end last season against Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl, one of the better bowl games of the year last year. How do I put this? An encouraging loss to Ohio State, I guess, because the game was closer than a lot of people thought it would be. 21-10, I believe, was the final score of that one a couple of weeks ago. And then the Marshall game happens. And this is just disastrous and really no excuse. Regardless of what the Notre Dame man thinks about Brian Kelly's recruiting ability, the talent on Notre Dame's roster is sufficient enough to where they should be able to beat Marshall without a problem. I get it. Believe me. Look, Notre Dame over the last 10 to 12 years under Brian Kelly actually has a lot in common with the Georgia team under Mark Richt. Winning 9, 10-plus games almost every single year, but sort of plateauing, and eventually the fan base kind of getting to the point where they feel like they're not going any higher under the current regime, right? That's kind of how Notre Dame fans start to feel. Now, Mark Richt was fired at Georgia. Brian Kelly left, so the situation is different in that respect. But in terms of the way the fan base has felt about those previous coaches is sort of the same. But Brian Kelly had enough talent on that team to win. I mean, he averaged over 10 wins a year during his time at Notre Dame. Made the playoffs. Made an ACC title game in Notre Dame's only year ever where they actually participated in a conference. Made the BCS title game back in 2012. Now, we all know the record about major postseason games with Notre Dame and Brian Kelly's failings there. You know, Notre Dame hasn't won a major postseason game since like 1989, the last time they won a Natty. Really only one time I can think of where Brian Kelly really crapped the bed, and that was the 3-9 season that Brian Kelly had. That seems like 5 or 6 years ago now. I'd have to look it up and see. But every other year was 10-plus wins. Now, maybe this will end up being Marcus Freeman's throwaway year. I mean, he is a guy that's never been a head coach before, right? Brian Kelly, when he was brought on at Notre Dame, had prior coaching experience at Cincinnati, right? And was doing well there. There is no substitute for head coaching experience. whatever you think about Kirby Smart now, go back and look at Georgia's record in 2016, his first year at Georgia. Georgia won 10 games in 2015, fired Mark Richt, brought Kirby Smart in, and Kirby went 7-5. 7-5 in the regular season, 8-5 after a bowl win. So if you could fast forward to the end of the regular season and find out that Notre Dame is even 8-4, I know that's not what the Notre Dame man wants, and that's not going to make losing to Marshall go down any easier. That's inexcusable. I can't believe I'm on here defending Notre Dame or Marcus Freeman, but the idea that somehow he's already failed after the first 3 games, I feel is a little bit unfair. I also feel it's completely unacceptable that they lost to Marshall, and not only that, Marshall was the better team. Marshall was just a better team in that game. Sometimes you say, well, man, if the game just would have been 10 minutes longer, Notre Dame could have got it done. No, if the game would have been 10 minutes longer, it would have been a 2-score win for Marshall instead of a 1-score win. This is bad for Notre Dame. What Notre Dame has to worry about now for the rest of this season is 2 things, and they're connected. They cannot have another one of these losses. Now, they're going to have more losses. They can't have another loss like this to anyone that they're considered to be significantly better than. They could lose to BYU. Notre Dame fans don't want that, but that would be understandable maybe. Southern Cal, understandable. Clemson and North Carolina, you better split those. You better split those. And at the end of the year, maybe you're sitting there at 8-4 and 9-3. That's the first thing that needs to be the focus right now. You cannot go any worse than that. The second thing, which ties into the first thing, is the recruiting class. Recruiting rankings in June, July, August, and September are fun to talk about. They're a reason to get excited sometimes. You sign a big name guy, or not sign, you can't sign. That's what I'm getting at. But a big name guy commits to you, a target of particular interest at a position of need commits to your school. That is reason to get excited. And when you look at how high Notre Dame's class is ranked for 2023, it's a positive sign and a step in the right direction. But you have to remember, none of these kids are obligated to Notre Dame at this point. Or any other school for that matter, no matter what team we're talking about. Wherever you want to, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, whoever you want to look at in the recruiting rankings, that could change tomorrow, right? These kids are not obligated. They cannot sign until December. If Notre Dame's season falls apart, and if there's another loss, like the one they had this past weekend, then that could spell trouble for Marcus Freeman. The biggest potential upside for Marcus Freeman was his ability to take Notre Dame from a 10-win, top 10 to top 15 recruiting team to take them to an 11-plus win team recruiting inside the top 10 on a consistent basis with some top 5 classes, right? You have another loss like you had to Marshall, or you somehow go 6-6 or 7-5 this year, it's going to be hard for Marcus Freeman to keep that recruiting class together, in my opinion. Especially in the era of NIL. To me, that's the worst case kind of disaster scenario for Notre Dame right now. That they don't get it together and the season sort of unravels and falls apart. Picture sort of a Florida scenario from last year where maybe the end of the season is just like a give-up mode type of thing and they just drop some head-scratching games and then people start to decommit. That could be bad. And that could be bad to the point concerning Marcus Freeman, where it's bad not only for this year because of the record, but it could create bad things a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road if that recruiting class falls apart and Notre Dame actually becomes less talented under Marcus Freeman than they were under Brian Kelly. That's the sort of nightmare scenario, I think, if you're a Notre Dame fan. And the other thing is, and this has to be fixed immediately, if Notre Dame signs one player in 2023, it needs to be a competent quarterback. It needs to be a game-changing, playmaking QB. I was forced to change my thinking, evolve my way of thinking about the quarterback position last year due to Georgia's success with Stetson Bennett. However, if you put Stetson Bennett or a quarterback like Stetson Bennett on a roster that doesn't have top 5 talent, you're not getting where you want to go. A game-changing, elite, dynamic QB is the quickest way to take your team from, an 8-9 win team to a 12-plus win team. That's the easiest way to get from 8 wins to 12 wins if you're trying to do it as quickly as possible by upgrading one position. Notre Dame's QB play has not been good really for a while. We know about the issues with the skill position players. They've had a hard time landing the elite corners, the elite wide receivers. So when they match up against these elite teams, whether it be playoffs or New Year's Six games or whatever it is, and they're facing off with these teams that have NFL potential type wide receivers or NFL DBs, that's where Notre Dame has sort of fallen apart and fallen flat. They've had decent lines of scrimmage. They're great tight ends. They've had a few good running backs and a few good wide receivers, but not enough. Not enough. They need to get Tyler Buchner ain't it. I know 2 games in, it's not looking good for your boy Tyler Buchner, Rudy. That I can tell you. Shout out to Marshall, Notre Dame, season over with 2 losses. You're not even making a New Year's Six bowl at this point. Sorry. You know my feelings on Notre Dame. Notre Dame needs to go 12-0 to make the playoffs. They need to go 11-1 to make a New Year's Six bowl because they don't play a 13th game by choice. That's my feeling. That's my own personal thoughts. That doesn't mean it can't happen. But I don't think even if Notre Dame... Well, I guess if Notre Dame runs the table, that would include a win over Southern Cal, Clemson, and BYU, so maybe they could back into a New Year's Six game. But come on, Notre Dame's not beating all of those teams. Not the Notre Dame I've seen. So, not a good start to the Freeman era. 0-3 as a head coach now, going back to last year. Not good. I got Pitt on here. I'm not going to dogpile on Pitt. Look, I'm still thinking about that Pitt-West Virginia game. It could be this season comes to an end. We look back at that Pitt and West Virginia game as one of, if not the best games of the year. I'm not going to dogpile on Pitt. Their quarterback went down, Slovis. Okay, that happens a lot to a lot of teams. And Pitt fell short. To me, again, it's kind of like with the Alabama-Texas thing. To me, this isn't really about Pitt losing. To me, this is about Tennessee winning. And I know, I've had a lot of fun with Tennessee. Hell, I'm still having fun with them with the mustard bottle and the golf balls and that. Had a lot of fun with Tennessee. I think we have to give Tennessee their fair amount of credit here. Their defense won that game. Not that the offense was terrible or didn't play good. The offense didn't have its best day, clearly. Now, Pitt does have a pretty good defensive front. I don't think Tennessee's offense played up to its ability or its capability, and I thought Tennessee would win that game by a couple of scores. It ended up going to overtime, and Tennessee won there. But Tennessee's defense won that game. And if you'd have told me at the beginning of this season, Tennessee's going to win 9 games, I would have said, well, that's 9 games the offense won because the defense was so bad last year, so bad. Now, Tennessee's defense still has a long way to go from being a quote-unquote elite defense. After all, this is Pitt we're talking about here. They lost a lot off of last year's team. A Heisman finalist QB in Kenny Pickett. The Biletnikoff award-winning wide receiver Jordan Addison transferred to Southern Cal. And now in this game, they lose Kenny Pickett's replacement, Keaton Slovis. So I don't want to overstate and try to make it sound like I'm on some kind of Tennessee hype train and their defense is unbelievable. But if you look where Tennessee's defense was at last year, and then look at the performance this Saturday against Pitt, that's a night and day difference. I'm sorry. I call things like I see. I have made video after video after video laughing and clowning Tennessee because they deserved it. I have never come on here and just made fun of Tennessee because I like making fun of Tennessee. Yeah, I like making fun of Tennessee, but that's not why I do it. I do it when they deserve it. I do it when their fans throw mustard bottles on the field. I do it when they hire Derek Dooley. I do it when Butch Jones says something dumb. I do it when they hire Jeremy Pruitt for no reason and crap the bed for 2.5 years. But when they do something unexpectedly good, you have to point that out. If not, you just don't have any credibility. You can't point out all the negatives and never point out a positive when it happens, especially when it's like finding a rainbow-colored unicorn eating fairy dust out of a pot of gold. And Tennessee having a good defensive performance is like that. Tennessee having a good defensive performance is like a friggin' rainbow-colored unicorn eating fairy dust out of a pot of gold. I couldn't believe it. I am literally sitting here saying, yes, Tennessee's defense won that game. Can we give them some credit? Now, I picked Tennessee to win that game. Tennessee's got a nothing game this week. Now, in years past, there was no such thing as a nothing game for Tennessee. This is a trap game coming up for Tennessee, but I just don't think, I think Tennessee is over the falling into the trap thing. I think they're, at least for this season, I don't think they're going to have one of these Georgia State issues. I don't see it. I don't see it. They're going to win this weekend. And then next weekend they play Florida. Florida's already got the one loss. Florida's back is against the wall. That one SEC loss against Kentucky. This is the first game that's sort of been circled on Tennessee's schedule. Not that the Pitt game didn't mean anything, but clearly an SEC game, a little bit more important in the grand scheme of things for Tennessee than a non-con Week 2 game against Pitt, right? Tennessee's got to win that game. They have got to win that game. I know the records. I know what's happened. Whatever it is, Florida's 16 or 17-1 or 18-1 against Tennessee in the last 18 or 19. Whatever. I know. But this game is in Tennessee. Tennessee has looked like the better team both weeks so far this year that they've played. Florida showed some serious flaws, weaknesses, and issues this past weekend against Kentucky. Anthony Richardson, there's no denying his talent and his ability, but let me ask you this. When it comes to that game, and I know this, we're getting way off of Pitt. Pitt, your season's over. Pitt, your season was over when Kenny Pickett went to the NFL and Jordan Addison went to Southern Cal. Because you don't recruit at a level to replace players like that in 1 year. You don't. Which some people, spend all offseason telling you. So your season is over. You'll be back to a Christmas Bowl this year. Nobody will even remember what your record was in January. But again, this game was about Tennessee. Tennessee's got to beat Florida. They've got to beat Florida. They've got to get over that mental hump and beat Florida. I said it in the offseason. I haven't seen anything this year yet to change my mind. If not now, when? If not now, when? If you're not going to beat Florida now, when? Florida, Georgia, Bama. You got to start winning some of those games, some of the years. Tennessee is 3-33 in the last 12 years against, yes, 3-33 in the last 12 years against Georgia, Bama, and Florida. Their three biggest rivals. 3-33. Tennessee's got to win that game. It's in Knoxville. New coaching staff at Florida. First-year starter, quarterback, and Anthony Richardson. You better win that game, Tennessee. That's all I'm saying. Baylor. I'm not going to clown Baylor a lot either. I'm very high on Baylor in the offseason. I think Baylor's a very good team with an even better head coach. I think Dave Aranda is one of the hottest names in coaching right now. I've said this before. I'm going to say it again now. I don't care that they lost to BYU this past weekend. If Nick Saban announced tomorrow that he was retiring, I believe the first phone call Alabama would make would be to Dave Aranda. That's just my opinion right now. Now, that could change. 3 years ago, if you'd asked me that, I'd have said Mario Cristobal. Now I don't think they're going to get Mario Cristobal away from Miami. But at the time, Mario Cristobal wasn't at Miami. Anyway, if you ask me right now, I think that would be Alabama's first call. I think it would be Dave Aranda. I'm that high on Dave Aranda. He's very, very good. But they did lose to BYU. I'm not going to rag on them too much. Because even though I was high on Baylor in the offseason and think they can still win the Big 12, remember, this isn't a conference game. It will be next year when BYU joins the Big 12. Not a conference game this year, though. BYU's still technically independent this year. But I'm not going to rag on Baylor too much, because when I did my Baylor prediction video a week or two before the season started, I actually predicted Baylor to lose this game on the road at BYU. Just thought it was a tough spot. BYU had a lot coming back. I think Baylor's going to be a much better team in October than they are in September. They're replacing some stuff. And it was a close game. I mean, it's not like they got blown out. Again, a one-score game. Kind of a could have gone either way type of deal. Home game for BYU, tough place to play. BYU pulled it out. Shout out to BYU. Another team I've given a hard time over the years on here for obvious reasons. But BYU got the job done. Baylor didn't. Now, Baylor can still accomplish the majority of its goals. I don't know about playoffs. We'll see. That, of course, is going to depend on what happens in all the other conferences and what happens with BYU. all the talk all these years about Notre Dame making the playoffs at 12-0. We might want to start thinking about what's going to happen if BYU goes 12-0. Not saying they will, but just look at their schedule. They play Notre Dame. Just look at their schedule. We'll see. We'll see. But Baylor, this is a non-conference loss. Baylor can still make the Big 12 title game. And honestly, I think they probably will. I'm going to talk more about the Big 12 in a second. But Baylor, your season is over. Not really, but you know how these videos work. If you lose, I just tell you your season is over. Look at this. Look at this. God almighty. What's it called? I should have looked it up. When a baby is first born and they take a dump, it's not called doo-doo. It's called something else. Markham or macrum or something. That's what West Virginia is. They're baby doo-doo. They're baby doo-doo. West Virginia is 0-2. And that's not even the worst part. West Virginia is 0-2. Kansas is 2-0. Mind blown. What kind of odds could you have got on that in Vegas in the offseason? If you could have placed that bet. Hey, bet you Kansas starts out 2-0 and West Virginia starts out 0-2. How's that for a parlay? Boy, you'd have been laughing all the way to the bank. And it wasn't close. It wasn't close. West Virginia was more competitive against something called Pitt than they were against Kansas. That's right, Kansas is 2-0. Put up a 55 burger. Put up a speed limit on West Virginia. Beat them 55-42, I think it was. So, what is that, 13 points? A two-score game. Not a close game. My boy JT Daniels-Christ, again, played a good game, but look at the supporting cast around him. It's absolutely garbage. And this just in, too, breaking news. I just figured this out now. JT Daniels can't tackle. So, is it his fault that West Virginia gave up 55 points to something called Kansas? I mean, how many three-pointers is that? I don't even know how many three-pointers that is for Kansas to get to 55 points. I'm not a math major. I'm a scientist. So I don't know how many three-pointers Kansas hit, but they hit a ton of them to get to 55 points. It was raining threes, I guess. I don't know. Rock, chalk, Jayhawk. West Virginia 0-2. And again, Prophet Lou was right. Neil Brown is a disaster. To me, he's been a disaster since he got to West Virginia. West Virginia fans, y'all are seeing the light. I told y'all about 3 months ago, I said, you remember everything I said about Dan Mullen last offseason, two off seasons ago, and Florida fans laughed at me and told me I was wrong. And then about halfway through the season, they stopped telling me I was wrong. And then by the end of the season, they were calling for Dan Mullen to be fired. I told people about 3 months ago, that's what's going to happen with West Virginia fans and Neil Brown. They're all aboard the choo-choo train right now. Country Roads taking them home. If home is 2 losses in a row, then yes, Country Roads took you there because you're 0-2. Neil Brown doesn't know what he's doing. West Virginia fans are now slowly starting to stop pushing back against my belief that Neil Brown doesn't know what he's doing and should be fired. Not a lot of West Virginia fans are openly calling for him to be fired, but this is the first step towards that. It's just like what happened with Dan Mullen. First, they stop arguing with me. They stop telling me I'm wrong. And then you just wait. By November, the majority of West Virginia fans that you see on the internet are going to be calling for Neil Brown to be fired. Why? He's in over his head. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know what he's doing. Plain and simple. West Virginia, Baylor, Pitt, Rudy. And, hey, what? Now, yeah, of course I live in Georgia. Well, what am I looking for? Shout out to this. What is this? What is this now? What is this? I'm going to put, you know what? I've had the Nebraska helmet upside down, right? And I said, I'm not turning the Nebraska helmet right side up until they fire Scott Frost. Well, congratulations, you fired Scott Frost. I'll turn you right side up. But you're going over here. You're going over here with the group of 5. And since you lost to little old Georgia Southern, I'm going to put Georgia Southern. Oh, not there. Where does Nebraska go? Oh, yeah, you do. Forgot you were a Big Ten team. Forgot you were even a Power 5 team, to be honest. We're going to put Georgia Southern for 1 week in your place on the Big Ten shelf because you just don't deserve to be there. How bad did they want to fire this guy? If they would have kept Scott Frost till October 1st, all they had to do was keep him 2 more weeks. Scott Frost buyout now, when they fired him, $15 million. $15 million. If they would have kept Scott Frost until October 1st and then fired him, $7.5 million. They basically paid Scott Frost $7.5 million to leave 2 weeks early. That's a hell of a severance package if you can get it, ain't it? That's a hell of a severance package if you can get it. Hey, did Oregon score 70 points this last weekend? Same Oregon team that ain't got no offense. Oh, you get the terrible team, Lou. Oh, yeah? Was it? Is Georgia Southern terrible? How many points Nebraska score? Is Marshall terrible? How many points Notre Dame score? Is App State terrible? How many points did Texas A&M score? Oregon put up a 70 spot this weekend. Scored 3 against Georgia. Samford didn't score at all against Georgia. Same Samford that put up 1,000 yards and 60 points against Florida last year. Georgia's given up a total of 2 touchdowns in its last 4 games, and that includes a playoff game and a national title game. Boy, you people who spent all offseason saying Georgia's defense was going to fall off a cliff sure do seem awfully dumb today.